In the mornings, I like to sit on the veranda of my house with a cup of strong tea and watch South Portland wake up. 68 is a good age to finally learn to appreciate silence. My name is Hugh Abbott, and for the past 43 years, I have taught English literature at a local college. Now retired, I can afford to do what I always dreamed of doing, reading books for pleasure, not for curriculum. This is the house Winifred and I inherited from her parents. It was small but cozy, with white fencing, blue shutters, and a creaky veranda. The neighbors gradually changed. Old people died or moved in with their children, and young families took their places. It used to bother me, but now I find a certain comfort in the continuous flow of life. Winifred passed away 15 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, as it often is, too late diagnosed. She was melting before her eyes, but even in her last days, she worried more about me and Pearl than herself. Pearl was 23 at the time. She had just finished the master's degree in economics that we had worked so hard to pay for. "Such I can take care of her, Hugh," Winifred asked the day before she died. "She's strong, but sometimes that strength turns to rigidity." I promised, though even then I sensed that our daughter was drifting away, building a life of her own in which I had less and less place. Winifred was right about rigidity. Pearl always wanted more. Better grades, better clothes, better surroundings. I could see how embarrassed she was to invite her friends to our humble home, how she cringed when I drove her around in our old Volvo. As a child, she often asked why we couldn't live like the Harrington family, who had a huge house with a swimming pool. "Because I'm a literature teacher, honey, not a neurosurgeon like Mr. Harrington," I replied. "Hello, so you should have been a neurosurgeon." 10-year-old Pearl shrugged, disappointment in her voice even then. Winifred and I were never rich, but we were happy. At least I thought we were. We put everything we could into our daughter's education. We denied ourselves many things so that she could attend a good private school and then a prestigious university. Winifred worked part-time as an editor at the local newspaper, and I took extra hours in summer courses. We'd been saving for her college since she learned to walk. When Pearl met Roland Pierce in her senior year of college, I was happy for her. A boy from a good family, a future lawyer, well-mannered and polite. The fact that he came from a well-to-do family seemed to me at the time a stroke of luck for my daughter. She was entering the world she had always dreamed of. At their wedding, at a lavish country club paid for entirely by Roland's parents, I felt out of place. My old but tidy tuxedo seemed ridiculous next to the expensive suits of the guests. Pearl was dazzlingly beautiful in a dress that cost more than I made in a month. When the time came for the toast, I could see her watching my words tensely, afraid I would say something inappropriate. "My dear Pearl," I said then, raising my glass, "you have been a light in my mom and I's lives from day one. She would be so proud of you today. Roland, thank you for loving our girl. Take care of each other. A short toast, nothing extra." Pearl exhaled with relief and smiled at me, for the first time all day sincerely. After the ceremony, I heard one of the guests ask why the wedding wasn't at the bride's father's estate. Roland politely explained that I was a retired university professor. There was no disrespect in his voice, but a condescension that I recognized more and more in my daughter's voice. After the wedding, we saw each other rarely. Pearl and Roland bought a large house in an upscale neighborhood in South Portland. They had 2 children, my grandchildren Ezra and Olivia. I visited them on Sundays, bringing homemade toys and books that were usually left untouched. The kids preferred electronic gadgets. My pension was modest, but I was used to living within my means. I fixed the roof when it leaked, renewed the wiring myself when the electrician asked for an amount equal to my monthly income. I managed until my health failed me. That day I was just walking up the stairs with a basket of laundry. Suddenly the room spun and I woke up on the floor. A neighbor heard the crash and called an ambulance. Diagnosis, microstroke. "It's nothing," the doctor said, but warned me that it's risky to live alone now, especially in a house with steep stairs and no emergency button. Pearl visited me in the hospital the second day. I noticed at once her tired look and the tense line of her mouth, the same line that Winifred had when she was worried. "How are you, Daddy?" she asked, sitting awkwardly on the edge of the hospital bed. "Like an old man reminded of his age," I joked. But Pearl didn't smile. "The doctor says you can't live alone." "Doctors say a lot of things. I'll do just fine." "No, Daddy." There was a note of steel in her voice. I won't be afraid every day that you'll fall and lie there for hours until someone finds you. What do you suggest? A nursing home? She cringed at those words. You could, stay with us for a while until you're stronger. I looked at my daughter in surprise. In the last few years, she had never once suggested that I stay at their house longer than for dinner. What does Roland think? He agrees. She looked away, and I realized that wasn't entirely true. We have a guest room on the first floor. You won't have to go up the stairs. What about my house? You'd have to sell it sooner or later anyway. Pearl shrugged. It's old and in need of repair. It's a good time to sell, and real estate prices are high. I wanted to object, but I knew she was right. The house did require more and more investment that I couldn't afford. Still, the thought of selling the place where I'd spent my whole life with Winifred, where Pearl had grown up, was physically painful. Think about it, Dad, Pearl said, standing up. I have to go. Ezra has a soccer game tonight. When she left, I stared out the window at the gray autumn sky for a long time. Sell the house. Move in with my daughter. Start a new chapter of life at age 68. I was released from the hospital 3 days later. Pearl insisted I go straight to their place, though I asked to be taken home to at least pack my things. Roland and I will pack everything. She cut him off. You need peace. Their house was impressive, even on the 100th visit. 3 stories high, with columns at the entrance and an immaculately manicured lawn. Inside, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, antique furniture. The guest room they put me in was larger than the living room in my house. Make yourself comfortable, Dad, Pearl said, setting my shabby suitcase by the bed. Dinner's at 7. Dinner passed in tense silence. Roland asked politely how I was feeling. The children answered my questions about school in one-word answers. Pearl was silent, concentrating on the meat on her plate. I'm thinking of selling the house, I said at last. You're right, Pearl. That's the sensible thing to do. She looked up, and I could see the relief in her eyes. I know a good realtor, Roland said immediately. He'll find a buyer in no time. I'd like to go back there first, get my things, say goodbye. Dad, you can't worry, Pearl interrupted. We'll take care of everything. Just tell us exactly what you want to keep. I realized there was no point in arguing. That night I made a list of things I wanted to keep. Photo albums, Winifred's letters, her jewelry, my books, old records. It was a long list. Dad, we can't bring your whole house here. Pearl frowned as she looked through it. We just don't have room. Then I'll rent a storage unit, I replied. I'll pay for it out of the money from the sale of the house. It's a waste of money, she sighed, but do as you please. A week later, Roland's realtor found a buyer. A young family with 2 children, willing to pay even more than the asking price. They fell in love with the porch and the blue shutters. Sworn away. You see, Daddy, Pearl said when the deal was done, everything is working out for the best. I was allowed to visit the house before the final handing over of the keys. Pearl came with me, glancing nervously at her watch. She had an appointment with the interior designer. I walked slowly through the rooms, saying goodbye to every corner. This was where Winifred liked to read by the window with her legs tucked under her. This is where Pearl took her first steps, clinging to the edge of the couch. This is where we celebrated every Christmas by putting up homemade ornaments. Daddy, we have to go, Pearl said as I lingered in Winifred's in my bedroom. Just a minute, I asked and opened the drawer of the bedside table. There, under a stack of handkerchiefs, was an envelope. I took it out and put it in the inside pocket of my jacket. Pearl didn't notice the gesture. She was already coming down the stairs, tapping her heels. There was a surprise waiting for me at Pearl's house. My room was half full of boxes of things from home. That's everything on your list, Pearl explained. The rest we gave to the thrift store. That's okay, isn't it? There was no doubt in her voice that she'd done the right thing. I nodded, unable to explain that it wasn't just about the things on the list. It was about a sense of home that couldn't be packed into boxes. That night I couldn't sleep for a long time. I opened the envelope I'd taken from my nightstand. Inside was a letter from my financial advisor, dated last year, and an account statement. 20 years ago, when Pearl had gone to university, I'd invested a small amount of money I'd inherited from my uncle in the stock of a then little-known technology company. The consultant thought it was crazy, but I insisted. Intuition? Luck? I don't know, but the amount in the account was already several times the value of the house I sold. I never told Pearl or Roland about the money. At first, because I wanted it to be my old age insurance for Winifred and me. Then, after she died, I just forgot about it, falling into the routine of a lonely life. Or maybe I didn't forget, but subconsciously kept them, not for myself, but for Pearl and the grandchildren, for a rainy day. As I fell asleep in someone else's bed, in someone else's house, I thought that perhaps that rainy day had already come. The first month in Pearl and Roland's house was a continuous series of small humiliations for me. By the third day, I realized that my presence here was a forced measure, not a show of concern for my aging father. In the mornings, I went down to the kitchen to make my own oatmeal, as I had done for the past 20 years. But Pearl insisted I not use their designer stove. Cheery. We have a housekeeper, Dad, she explained, taking the pot out of my hands. Lucinda comes at 8 o'clock and makes breakfast. Just tell her what you want. I'm used to doing it myself. And another thing, Pearl interrupted, please don't go out in the common areas in that robe. It looks, inappropriate. My old flannel robe, the one I wore on Winifred's day, was suddenly inappropriate. So were my house slippers, my wool cardigans, and even my horn-rimmed glasses, which Pearl thought made me look like a library watchman. The next day, new things appeared in my room. A silk robe, a cashmere sweater, designer glasses. All of impeccable quality and not mine at all. It was a gift, Pearl said when I tried to object. You live in our house and I want you to look appropriate. Appropriate for what? Their idea of what an elderly father of a successful woman should look like? Or their fear of the neighbors seeing me taking out the trash in my ragged sweater? Roland was more tolerant of my habits, but he was rarely home. He spent his days at his law firm and his evenings at business dinners or at the country club. Sometimes, returning late, he would drop by my room, where I usually read before bed. How are you, Hugh? He would ask with a polite smile. Everything all right? Quite well, thank you, Roland. That's good. Good night. These brief exchanges of pleasantries were the only communication we had. I realized I was a burden to him, a problem that had to be solved for his wife's peace of mind. The grandchildren, Ezra and Olivia, ages 12 and 10, showed some interest in my presence at first. I offered to help them with their lessons, especially literature and history, but Pearl rejected the idea. They have tutors, Dad. Professional ones, she emphasized. And then, teaching methods are very different now. Gradually, the children adopted their mother's attitude. Olivia wrinkled her nose when I tried to hug her. Ezra rolled his eyes when I suggested we play chess instead of his video games. One day I overheard him telling a friend on the phone, "No, I can't tonight. My parents are having a dinner party, and the old man will be there. You know, the grandpa who lives with us. Yeah, the one who always wears those stupid sweaters." I left before I finished, with a heavy heart. Winifred would be upset to know how little her grandchildren valued family ties. The most difficult ordeal were the soirees Pearl hosted every weekend. The house was filled with people in expensive outfits, with impeccable manners and idle conversation. I was introduced as my father, Professor Abbott, with the emphasis on professor, as if that title could compensate for my apparently modest income. On one such evening, I found myself sitting at a table next to a woman called Sybil, the wife of a financier. "So you taught literature?" she asked, sipping her wine. "How nice. My housekeeper really likes to read novels. Perhaps you know of something she might enjoy." I started to tell her about a novel I'd recently read, but Sybil had already lost interest, turning to the guest sitting on my right. After dinner, when everyone had moved to the living room for cocktails, I heard Pearl explain in a whisper, "Yes, it's temporary. He's had a microstroke, and the doctors don't recommend he live alone. We're looking for a good boarding house with medical care." A boarding house? That's the first I've heard of this plan. We never discussed the option of me moving into a nursing home. I thought I would live with them until I found a suitable small apartment. That night I couldn't sleep, tossing and turning in the too soft bed with silk sheets. I felt like an outsider in my own daughter's life, a burden she wanted to get rid of at the first opportunity. At breakfast this morning, I decided to clear the air. "Pearl, I overheard you talking about boarding school yesterday," I began, trying to keep my voice calm. We'd never discussed that option. She froze with the cup of coffee halfway to her mouth, then slowly set it on the saucer. "I wanted to talk to you about it when we had concrete options," she replied, not looking me in the eye. It's just one of the possibilities we're considering. We? Yes, Roland and I. Her tone hardened. Dad, you realize this can't be a permanent solution, don't you? We have our own lives, children, commitments. I thought we agreed that I would stay with you until I was strong enough to find an apartment. But you sold the house. What are you going to live on? Your pension is barely enough to rent a decent place to live, let alone medical expenses. I could have told her about the money in the account, that I could well afford not only an apartment but a new house. But something held me back. Maybe it was intuition, maybe it was reluctance to admit that my daughter was judging my worth by the size of my bank account. I can handle it, I said instead. I always have. That's what I'm talking about, Dad, Pearl sighed. You've always managed, but you've never prospered. Always those used cars, worn-out sweaters, cheap watches. I grew up watching you and Mom constantly saving money, denying yourself everything. Your mom and I were happy, I countered, and we gave you everything we could. I know, and I'm grateful, she nodded, but this is about your future. I just want you to be safe, under the care of professionals. That was the end of the conversation, but the residue remained. I suddenly realized that Pearl was ashamed not only of my appearance, but of my whole life. Modest, poor, but honest and dignified. In the weeks that followed, the tension in the house only grew. Pearl made more and more frequent remarks about my habits. I read aloud too loudly, took too long in the shower, folded my towels incorrectly. Every action I took was criticized, every word analyzed. Once, when I walked into the living room while she was talking to a friend, she literally pushed me back out into the hallway. Daddy, I told you not to come in when I have company, she hissed. I just wanted to get the book I left on the table. I excused myself. You could have waited, or asked Lucinda. She shook her head. I can't keep worrying that you'll suddenly show up and start telling your college stories or reciting poetry. Never mind. Just please pay attention. I retreated to my room, feeling like a delinquent child. That night I made a decision. As soon as my health permitted, I would find a place to live and move out, even if it meant being away from my grandchildren. However, fate had it differently. A month after I moved in, I accidentally witnessed an argument between Pearl and Roland. I was returning from an evening walk in the garden, the only time I felt free in the house. As I passed Roland's study, I heard raised voices. This is the third notice, Pearl. Roland's voice sounded strained. The bank won't wait forever. I know, Pearl replied. Huh, but these payments are so huge. And after the patio remodeling, which you insisted on doing, even though I told you we couldn't afford it. Everyone's remodeling their houses, Roland. Do you want us to look like paupers in front of the Harringtons? I froze, amazed. The Harringtons were the same ones Pearl had compared our family to as children. She still measured them by their status. We're not paupers, but we're not millionaires, Pearl, exclaimed Roland. We have mortgages, loans for the children's education, my law school debt, and now your father. Leave Dad out of this, Pearl cut him off. He won't be here long. As soon as we find a suitable boarding house, which we need money for too. I heard Roland put something on the table with a clatter. We're barely making ends meet, and you keep spending like we have an unlimited budget. I support our lifestyle, Pearl objected stubbornly. Do you want clients to see Attorney Pierce living in a modest house with secondhand furniture? That the kids go to a regular school? For me to give up my club membership? I want us to live within our means, exclaimed Roland. These credit cards. My God, Pearl, you've borrowed as much as a year's salary. I backed away quietly, not wanting to eavesdrop any further. But what I heard was enough. My daughter and son-in-law, with their luxurious house and immaculate facade, were in debt. All this prosperity was built on the sands of loans and credit. Back in my room, I sat on the edge of my bed, trying to comprehend the situation. Pearl's impatience, her insistence on sending me to boarding school, was now clear to me. I was an extra expense in an already strained budget. The next morning at breakfast, I noticed the dark circles under Pearl's eyes and the tense line of her lips. Roland had already left for work, and the kids were at school. It was just the two of us in the huge kitchen. Is everything all right? I asked, even though I knew the answer. Sure, she said quickly, fixing her perfect hair. I just didn't sleep well. I wanted to tell her that I knew they were struggling financially, that I could help, but something held me back. Maybe her constant disdain for me, maybe the realization that she wouldn't accept help from the beggar father she was ashamed of. I think it's time for me to look for my own place, I said instead. I've gotten strong enough. She looked up at me, and I saw a strange mixture of relief and suspicion in her eyes. Are you sure? The doctor talked about at least 3 months of recovery. I feel fine, and I don't want to be a burden. You're not a burden, Dad, she objected automatically, but there was no conviction in her voice. Still, I need to move on. Maybe you could help me find a suitable apartment. Pearl hesitated, tapping her spoon on the rim of her cup. Actually, I have an idea, she said at last. Remember Mrs. Finch, my old music teacher? She rents out rooms in her boarding house. It's quiet, clean, and there's a nurse who comes twice a week. It's not a nursing home. It's more of a community for the elderly. Sounds good, I nodded, though I shuddered inwardly at the thought of living in a boarding house. I'll call her today. Pearl finished her coffee and stood up. I have to get to my Pilates class. Lucinda will be here all day if you need anything. When she left, I sat at the table for a long time, staring at the perfectly straight lines of the kitchen cabinets, the gleaming surfaces untouched by time. This house would never be my home, no matter how long I lived here. That evening, Pearl triumphantly announced that Mrs. Finch was ready to show me the room tomorrow. It's an excellent arrangement, Papa, she urged me. You'll be among people your own age, with common interests. Roland, sitting next to me, nodded with obvious relief. The kids didn't even look up from their tablets. I'll take a look, I agreed. But I can't promise I'll do it. Sure, Pearl smiled, but I could see the determination in her eyes. One way or another, she was going to get rid of her uncomfortable father. That night, I pulled out the envelope with the statement of account and stared at the numbers for a long time. I had the means to buy my own house, to travel, to live a decent life. But something kept me from revealing the secret. Maybe I wanted to see how far Pearl would go in her quest to distance herself from her uncomfortable beggar father. Or maybe I just wasn't ready to admit that my daughter's love had a price tag. As I fell asleep, I thought of Winifred and what she had said before she died. Take care of her, Hugh. She's strong, but sometimes that strength turns into toughness. I've tried to take care of Pearl all my life, denying myself everything for her future. But has my care turned into indulgence? Had I raised a daughter who valued material possessions over human relationships? Mrs. Finch's boarding house was exactly as I'd imagined, a neat, impersonal place with the smell of medicine and faded curtains. The building had once been a Victorian mansion, but the years had turned it into something between an economy hotel and a hospital. It's very cozy, I said to Pearl as we looked around the room. That could be my new home. And it's cheap, she added, apparently thinking that was the main advantage. Mrs. Finch is giving us a discount as an old student. The room was small with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a table by the window. The walls were covered with faded wallpaper with a pattern of pale roses. The only decoration was a lithograph of a seascape in a cheap frame. You'll have access to the common living room and dining room, Mrs. Finch, an older woman with carefully styled gray hair, explained. Breakfast is included in the price. Lunch and dinner are extra, or you can cook for yourself in the communal kitchen. I saw Pearl wrinkle her nose at the mention of a shared kitchen. To her, it was surely a sign of decadence and poverty to be forced to share space with strangers. We'd prefer full board, she said, deciding for me. And I wanted to clarify about medical care. While they discussed the details, I went to the window. The view was of a small, neatly trimmed garden with a few benches. On one of them sat an old man feeding pigeons. His solitary figure gave me a sudden thrill of fear. Is it my future to feed the birds in someone else's garden, waiting for the rare visits of my busy daughter? What do you say, Papa? Pearl interrupted my gloomy thoughts. I think it's a good idea. I turned to her, about to tell her I wanted to consider other options, but the look on her face stopped me. She'd already made up her mind. It was over for her. I need to think about it, I said instead. Of course, Mr. Abbott, Mrs. Finch smiled, but don't take too long to decide. We rarely have rooms available. We said goodbye politely and went outside. The day was clear, with a light spring breeze that reminded me that life went on, despite my problems. Well, Pearl asked impatiently as we got into her expensive SUV. What do you think? It's not what I was looking for, I answered honestly. What were you looking for? A penthouse downtown? There was a familiar note of irritation in her voice. Dad, be realistic. You can't get anything better on your pension, and they'll take care of you there. I don't need to be taken care of, Pearl. I need a home. This is a home, she exclaimed, pulling into the driveway. A home you can afford. Or would you rather live with us forever? I stayed silent, staring out the window at the houses floating by. Each one of them was someone's refuge, a place where a person was accepted for who they were. I didn't have a place like that anymore. I'm sorry, Pearl sighed, noticing my reaction. I didn't mean to be rude. It's just, Roland and I are going through a rough patch right now. We're struggling financially with the kids. Ezra's getting bad grades. Olivia's demanding expensive writing lessons. I understand, I nodded. And I don't want to be a burden. You're not a burden, Dad, she said automatically, but her tone said otherwise. That evening, Pearl announced that they were having a big dinner on Saturday. Roland's colleagues from the firm will be there, including the senior partners, she explained. It's very important for his career. Please, could you disappear for a while? I finished for her. No, of course not, she looked insulted. You're part of the family. I just wanted to ask you to wear that new suit I bought you, and maybe get a haircut. I ran my hand through my gray hair, which had actually grown longer than usual. Okay, I'll get a haircut. And also, she added, as if by the way, if they ask you about your career, maybe you should mention that you were department chair. It sounds more prestigious. But I was never a department chair, Pearl. I was just a regular faculty member. Yeah, but no one here knows that, she shrugged, and it makes a better impression. You're asking me to lie to impress your guests? Yeah, not lie, but embellish a little. Everyone does that. I shook my head, not believing my ears. My daughter, whom Winifred and I had taught to tell the truth, was now suggesting that I lie about my accomplishments. I won't do that, I said firmly. I was proud of my work, and I see no shame in it. Pearl pressed her lips together, but she didn't argue. Instead, she simply said, as you wish. Just try not to talk about politics or religion, and don't tell your stories about the Vietnam War. Nobody's interested in them. I wanted to counter that I never told stories about Vietnam because I hadn't served there. But Pearl was already walking away, tossing over her shoulder. And don't forget to get a haircut. Saturday came all too quickly. The whole house was in turmoil, with Lucinda preparing gourmet hors d'oeuvres, the florist arranging arrangements of expensive flowers, and Pearl scurrying from room to room, checking every detail. I kept my promise and got a haircut and wore the new suit Pearl had bought, a dark blue expensive fabric with a silk tie to match. Looking at myself in the mirror, I hardly recognized my own reflection. This elegant elderly gentleman had nothing in common with the Hugh Abbott I had known all my life. The guests began to arrive around 7. I stood to the side, watching Pearl and Roland greet everyone with polished smiles and impeccable manners. Everyone looked like they'd stepped off the cover of a glossy magazine. Perfect hair, designer outfits, radiant smiles. Roland led a tall man with silver temples and a keen eye toward me. Richard, I'd like you to meet Pearl's father, Hugh Abbott. Hugh, this is Richard Cormier, a senior partner in our firm. Nice to meet you, I said, shaking his outstretched hand. Likewise, Richard nodded. Roland tells me you taught at the college? Yes, English literature. 43 years. Impressive. What are some of your favorite authors? We fell into an unexpectedly pleasant conversation about literature. It turned out that Richard was an avid reader and had a particular appreciation for the classics. When I mentioned a little-known novel by Thomas Hardy, his eyes lit up. You've read Jude the Obscure? Amazing. No one I knew had even heard of it. We talked, oblivious to the time, until Pearl came up to us with a strained smile. Dad, you've monopolized the most important guest, she said, laughing, but I could feel the tension in her voice. Richard, let me introduce you to Sandra Lowell. She has recently returned from Paris and has some amazing stories to tell. Richard apologized and let Pearl lead him away, but not before saying to me, It was a pleasure talking to an educated man, Mr. Abbott. I hope we'll continue our conversation over dinner. Pearl turned at those words, and I could see the surprise on her face. Apparently, she hadn't expected her humble father to be interested in a man as powerful as Richard Cormier. At dinner, I was seated at the far end of the table, next to a young woman who turned out to be Roland's assistant and an older gentleman who spent most of his time staring at his phone. Richard Cormier sat next to Pearl, in the seat of honor. The conversation at the table revolved around investments, real estate, and the latest political scandals. I ate in silence, occasionally answering polite questions from my neighbors. That all changed when Richard suddenly turned to me across the table. Hugh, you mentioned a study on the influence of Victorian literature on modern prose. It sounds fascinating. All heads turned in my direction. Pearl froze with a glass of wine in her hand, her eyes widening with surprise. Yes, it was the subject of my doctoral dissertation, I replied. I traced the line of influence from Dickens to modern authors. Dad never talks about his research work, Pearl interjected with a nervous laugh. He's so modest. Modesty is an underrated quality these days, Richard said, nodding at me, especially among real intellectuals. I noticed Pearl's face tense. She hadn't expected her mediocre father to be the center of attention for her important guest. Roland told me you worked at the local college, Richard continued. Dash, dash. Yes, South Portland College. Not the most prestigious institution, but Daddy taught at the community college, Pearl interrupted, a faint note of disdain in her voice. Ashin, it's kind of like a preparatory course for a real university. There was an awkward pause. I felt the blood rush to my cheeks, not from the shame of my career, but from the pain of my daughter's words. Actually, I said calmly, South Portland College has an excellent reputation in academia. Many of my students have gotten into the Ivy League after 2 years of study with us. Sure, Pearl agreed quickly. I just wanted to say that Dad could always work somewhere more prestigious if he wanted to. He had offers. That was an outright lie. I'd never gotten an offer from any other institution, nor had I sought one. I liked my job, my students, the chance to go home to Winifred every day. I was happy where I was, I said. Not everyone measures success by the prestige of the institution. Richard nodded, clearly approving, but Pearl was already turning the conversation to another topic, asking someone about a recent trip to Italy. The rest of the dinner passed without incident, but I could feel the tension building. Pearl avoided looking in my direction, and when everyone moved into the living room for coffee, she deliberately stayed away from me. I was about to retire discreetly to my room when Richard approached me again. Hugh, I've really enjoyed our conversation. I have a small collection of first editions that you might be interested in. If you have time, I'd be happy to show it to you. I'd love to, I replied sincerely. That's fine. He took out a business card. Give me a call and we'll make an appointment. Pearl, who was standing nearby, heard the exchange and immediately came to my side. Richard, what a wonderful idea. But Dad's moving to a boarding house soon, so he'll probably be busy settling in. Boarding house? Richard raised his eyebrows. At your age, Hugh, you look quite robust. It's a temporary solution, I interjected, feeling the awkwardness of the situation, until I find a suitable apartment. I see. Richard nodded, but I saw something like judgment in his eyes, and it wasn't directed at me. When the last guest left, Pearl exploded. She flew into my room without knocking, her face contorted with anger. What was that? She hissed. Were you deliberately trying to humiliate me? What are you talking about? I really didn't understand her claim. About your flirting with Richard Cormier, as if you're a great intellectual and not just, She faltered, but it was too late. Not just who, Pearl? I asked quietly. Finish the sentence. Not just a third-rate college professor, she blurted out. Richard is an important man. He could make Roland a partner or destroy his career, and you acted like you were old friends. We were just talking about books, I countered. I wasn't trying to impress or interfere with Roland. That's exactly what you were doing. Her voice was getting louder. You were drawing attention to yourself, making yourself out to be some kind of scientific luminary. And I know the truth. You're just a loser who couldn't even provide a decent life for his family. Her words hit me like a slap in the face. I felt something inside me break, the last thread that connected me to the daughter I knew. Is that how you see your life with me and Mom? As a failure? What else would you call it? She waved her arms, circling the room. Look at my house, my life. I've achieved all this on my own, in spite of you, not because of you. All this. I looked around the room, full of expensive but impersonal things. You mean the house you can't afford? A life of pretense and debt? She turned pale. You were eavesdropping. No. I overheard your conversation with Roland, and I know you're up to your neck in debt. That's none of your business. Her voice broke into a scream. We'll get through this. We've been through hard times before. I could help, I suggested, if you asked. She laughed, but it was a bitter, angry laugh. What can you do? With your miserable pension? Don't be ridiculous, Papa. A penniless father like you is a disgrace. The words hung in the air, heavy and inescapable. I looked at the woman in front of me and didn't recognize her as my daughter. The girl I taught to ride a bike. The girl I read bedtime stories to. The girl I comforted after her first heartbreak. So that's how you see me, I said quietly. As a disgrace. Yeah. She stammered, apparently realizing she'd gone too far. That's not what I meant. I'm just tired, frustrated. The evening didn't go as I'd planned. No, Pearl, that's exactly what you meant. I stood up feeling strangely calm. And you know what? I'm tired too. Tired of trying to live up to your expectations. Tired of feeling like an uncomfortable reminder of a past you're trying to forget. What are you doing? She asked as I started packing my things into my suitcase. Leaving. Tonight. Don't be silly, Dad. Where are you going in the middle of the night? To a hotel. Tomorrow I'll look for an apartment. A real apartment, not a room at the boarding house you want to send me to. We're just worried about you, she exclaimed, but her voice sounded false even to herself. No, Pearl, you're worried about yourselves, about your comfort, about your image, about what the neighbors will say. I was blind not to see that before, or maybe I just didn't want to notice. I closed my suitcase and straightened up. Goodbye, Pearl. I'll call you when I'm settled and give you my address. You can come visit me if you want, but I'm not going to live where I'm a burden and a disgrace. You can't just leave. She's blocking my way. What will I tell the children? Roland, what will people say? Tell them the truth, or lie. That's what you wanted me to do today. Lie to impress you. I walked around her and headed for the door. She grabbed my arm. If you leave now, don't you dare come back. There was panic in her voice. I'm serious, Dad. This is your last chance. I gently released her hand. No, Pearl. This is your last chance. A chance to remember that family isn't a facade for the neighbors or a line on a resume. It's people who love you in spite of your flaws, just like I've loved you your whole life. With those words, I left the room, walked down the stairs and outside. The night air was fresh and clean, as if washing away all the bitterness of the last few hours. I hailed a cab and asked them to take me to a hotel in the center of the city. Not the cheapest, but not too expensive either. Something in between where I could spend a few days until I found a permanent place to stay. Checking into the hotel, I felt strangely relieved. For the first time in many months, I was free of pretense, of having to conform to other people's expectations. I woke up late in the morning. A bright spring day shone outside my window, promising new beginnings. I decided to start looking for an apartment immediately, but first I checked the mail on my old laptop. Among the advertisements and newsletters, there was one that caught my eye. It was from Arthur Prescott, my financial advisor, with whom I hadn't spoken in years. Dear Mr. Abbott, he wrote, I hope this letter finds you in good health. I have tried to contact you by telephone, but have been unsuccessful, so I am writing by email. I have some important news for you regarding your investment in Technova Corp. As you may know, the company was recently acquired by a large technology giant, and the share price has increased several dozen times. Given the number of shares you own, the total value of your portfolio is now just over $6 million. Yes, you're not wrong, $6 million. Please contact me as soon as possible to discuss how to proceed. We need to decide what to do with these funds. Invest further, diversify the portfolio, or perhaps realize some of the gains. Sincerely, Arthur Prescott. I reread the letter 3 times, unable to believe my eyes. $6 million. a sum that would completely change my life, a sum that would make me richer than I had ever dreamed of being. I leaned back on the pillows trying to comprehend this new reality. The money I had invested 20 years ago, forgetting about it in the hustle and bustle of everyday life, had now turned into a fortune. I was a millionaire. I, Hugh Abbott, a humble literature teacher who was considered a beggar and a disgrace by his own daughter. The bitter irony of the situation did not escape me. If Pearl had known about the money yesterday, our quarrel would never have happened. She would have looked at me with different eyes, not as a burden, but as a valuable asset, a source of financial support. But perhaps it was all for the best. Now I could see her true attitude, unclouded by self-interest or pretense. And that knowledge, though painful, freed me. I picked up the phone and dialed Arthur Prescott's number. It was time to begin a new chapter of my life, a chapter in which I would live for myself, not for other people's expectations. Meeting Arthur Prescott changed my life. He sat across from me in his glass office in downtown South Portland, poring over documents and explaining what had happened to my investments. Technova Corp had gone through several rounds of funding, he said, adjusting his glasses, then issued an initial public offering and was recently bought by tech giant for a record amount. Your stock is now worth 120 times what it was originally worth. I nodded, trying to comprehend what was happening. 20 years ago, I had invested my inheritance from Uncle Frederick, $50,000, in a former student's startup. I remember Winifred doubting the reasonableness of that decision, but something in his burning eyes and passionate belief in his idea convinced me to take the risk. What do you plan to do with these funds? Arthur asked, looking at me over his glasses. Honestly, I don't know, I admitted. It all happened so suddenly. I see. He leaned back in his chair. I suggest we take things one step at a time. First, let's diversify your portfolio. Second, you need to think about tax planning. Third, you should update your will. Will. I couldn't help but think of Pearl. Despite our fight, she was still my only child. Perhaps I should have left her some of my fortune. But something inside me resisted the thought. Her last words were still ringing in my ears. A poor father like you is a disgrace. I'll deal with the will later, I replied. Right now, I'm more interested in accommodation. I'm staying in a hotel, but it's a temporary solution. With your money, you can buy any house in the city, Arthur smiled. Although I would recommend not spending more than 10% of your capital at once. I don't want a mansion, I shook my head. Just a cozy apartment or a small house, something where I'd feel comfortable. Whatever you say. I can recommend a reliable realtor. We discussed a few more technicalities and then I signed the necessary papers. As I left Arthur's office, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, uncertainty, excitement, and freedom. For the first time in years, I didn't have to count every dollar, worry about roof repairs, or whether my pension would be enough for the rest of the month. However, I decided not to drastically change my lifestyle. After all, I was 68 years old and my needs were modest. But now I could afford some small pleasures that I had only dreamed of before. The first thing I did was find a nice apartment in the historic South Portland neighborhood. It was the third floor of a restored Victorian mansion overlooking the ocean. High ceilings, big windows, wood floors. Not overly luxurious, but spacious and elegant. I paid full price all at once, which surprised the realtor. Sufferty. Usually people take out mortgages, she said, her eyes wide. I prefer to avoid debt, I replied simply. The next step was furnishing. I chose quality but not gaudy furniture that would last a long time and be comfortable. A large bookcase took up an entire wall in the living room. I gradually filled it with books, new editions of favorite classics, rare volumes that I always wanted to have, but could not afford. I turned one room into a study, installing a desk, a comfortable chair, and a computer. My first new computer in 10 years. On the walls, I hung a few paintings by local artists that I had purchased at an exhibition at the City Gallery. Every morning, I woke up in my new bedroom with a picture of Winifred on my bedside table. Sometimes I thought she was looking at me with a slight sneer, as if to say, "See, Hugh, I told you your crazy investment would pay off one day." She and I could be traveling the world right now, enjoying a well-deserved vacation together. But fate had it differently. I was alone, with money that came too late for the two of us, but perhaps not too late for me. After settling into a place to live, I decided to look into my health. I found a good therapist, had a full checkup, started taking the recommended medications. I enrolled in a swimming pool where I swam 3 times a week. I hired a personal trainer who developed an exercise program for me, taking into account my age and condition after a microstroke. Gradually, I felt better than I had in years. Gone was the constant fatigue, my sleep improved, and I had energy. I began to walk more, exploring the city, which seemed to open up to me anew. During one of these walks, I came across a small cafe called Sea Breeze not far from my home. It attracted me with its blue shutters, reminiscent of my old house. It was cozy and quiet inside, overlooking the bay. I began to go in there every morning to have a nice cup of tea and read the newspaper. The usual, Mr. Abbott. Maggie, a young waitress with freckles and a bright smile, asked. Yes, please, Maggie. And you can just call me Hugh. Gradually, I got to know the other regulars. Benjamin, a retired sailor who told amazing stories about his travels. Eleanor, a retired librarian with whom we could discuss books for hours. Simon, a local artist whose seascapes adorned the walls of the cafe. These people were unaware of my unexpected wealth. To them, I was just Hugh, an elderly retired professor who loved good tea and good conversation. And I loved that anonymity, that opportunity to be appreciated for who I was, not what I had. 3 months after moving in, I received a letter from Pearl. Formal, reserved, without a single note of warmth. Dad, I hope you're doing well. Roland and I have been worried, not hearing from you. The children have been asking about you. Please give me your new address and phone number. Pearl, I replied with my contacts, but didn't invite her to visit. I needed time to heal from our last encounter. And frankly, I was enjoying my independence. My new life, where I didn't have to constantly conform to someone else's expectations. She called a week later, her voice sounding strained. Daddy, how are you? We were worried. I'm fine, Pearl. I found an apartment, got settled in. That's good. She's quiet. I thought maybe you might want to come visit us. Sunday lunch? I remembered our previous Sunday lunches. Awkward, formal, filled with fake smiles and superficial conversations. Thanks for the invitation, but I have other plans for Sunday. What plans? There was surprise in her voice. I'm going to a contemporary art exhibition with some friends. Friends? She couldn't hide her amazement. That's wonderful, Dad. You've made new friends. Yeah, life goes on, Pearl. After that conversation, she called regularly, once a week, but our conversations remained superficial. I didn't tell her about my financial situation, and she didn't apologize for what she said. We both avoided talking about the past, as if an invisible but insurmountable wall lay between us. One day, Arthur Prescott suggested an idea that changed my life once more. Hugh, have you ever thought about charity? He asked during our monthly meeting. What do you mean? Many wealthy people set up charitable foundations or make donations. Not only does it help the community, but it has tax advantages, I wondered. The money was sitting in accounts, generating even more money, but no real satisfaction. Maybe I should have used it for something meaningful. I have an idea, I finally said. I want to help South Portland College. They've been in need of a library renovation and a new humanities building for a long time. Arthur smiled. That's a wonderful idea. I'll prepare all the necessary paperwork. Thus began my journey in philanthropy. I met with the director of the college, offering an anonymous donation for the construction of a new building and the renovation of the library collection. The amount, $2 million, made him literally speechless. That's incredibly generous, Mr. Abbott, he finally squeezed out. But why anonymously? I'm not looking for recognition, I explained. I just want to help the place that's been my home for 43 years. The college accepted the donation on the condition that the donor remain anonymous. However, on the day the new building was officially announced, I was invited to the ceremony as the guest of honor, a former faculty member. As I stood among the crowd listening to the enthusiastic speeches about the generous anonymous benefactor, I felt a strange satisfaction. Not from the praise, but from the knowledge that this money would help hundreds of students get the education they dream of. After the ceremony, a local photographer asked me to take some pictures for the newspaper. I reluctantly agreed, hoping I would remain somewhere in the background. But fate had it differently. The next day, the South Portland Herald came out with the headline, "College Receives Record Donation," and my picture in the front row of honorees. The article mentioned that the donor wished to remain anonymous, but some sources linked the donation to a former English literature professor. I didn't think much of it until I got a call from Pearl. "Dad," her voice sounded strangely strained. "I saw your picture in the paper. Something about a donation to the college?" "Yeah, I was at the ceremony as a former faculty member," I answered evasively. "It says something about some anonymous benefactor, and they hinted that it might be a former faculty member." I remained silent, not wanting to confirm or deny the speculation. "Chewan, Dad," her voice became harsher. "Where did you get the money for such donations?" "I didn't say it was my donation, Pearl." "But it is," she insisted. "You're suddenly rich and you didn't tell us?" "To your family?" I sighed. This conversation was bound to happen sooner or later. "Yes, I have money. An investment made many years ago turned out to be a good one." There was a long pause. I could almost see the gears turning in Pearl's head, trying to make sense of this information. "How many?" she finally asked. "Does it matter?" "Of course it matters. You're my father. I have to know." "Why? To decide if I'm worth your time and respect now?" She choked with indignation. "How can you say that? I've always respected you." "Have you?" I couldn't contain the bitterness in my voice. "A pauper father like you is a disgrace." "Is that respect, Pearl?" Silence again, heavier this time. "I was upset," she said quietly at last. "You know that's not what I meant." "No, I think that's exactly what you meant. And you know what? It opened my eyes, made me see what our relationship had become." "Dad, please," her voice trembled. "Let's not go back to that. Tell me about your investment. When did it happen? Why didn't you say anything?" I told her briefly, without details. The investment in Technova Corp, the recent sale of the company, the meeting with the financial advisor. But I didn't tell her the amount, even though she had tried to find it out in a roundabout way several times. "It's amazing," she said at the end of the conversation, and I caught a new note in her voice. Respect mixed with avid interest. "Machonas, we should celebrate. Why don't you come over for dinner Friday night? It's been so long since we've seen each other." "I'll think about it," I replied, not wanting to commit myself to a promise. After that conversation, I sat at the window for a long time, looking out at the ocean. Pearl's attitude changed the moment she suspected I had money. Suddenly, I was worthy of her attention, her time, an invitation to the house she had kicked me out of. I was saddened by this realization, but at the same time, I felt strangely relieved. I now knew exactly what our relationship had been based on for the past few years. Her condescension toward poor Dad, and my desire to preserve family ties at all costs. The next day I received an email from Pearl, the first in many years. She attached some pictures of her grandchildren and wrote that they missed their grandfather. At the end she added, "P.S. Roland spoke to Richard Cormier recently and he asked about you. He still wants to show you his book collection. Perhaps you could meet after our family dinner?" I smiled a bitter smile. Now she wasn't ashamed that her father would be socializing with important people. Now that she thinks I'm rich, I've become a worthy companion for her high-ranking friends. Instead of replying to Pearl's letter, I wrote to Richard Cormier, thanking him for the invitation and suggesting we meet the following Wednesday. He replied almost instantly, clearly delighted. I then called Arthur Prescott. "Arthur, I want to discuss the changes to my will," I said firmly. "Of course, Hugh. What do you want to change?" "Everything." In the weeks that followed, I traveled extensively. I went to London, where I visited all the literary places I dreamed of. Dickens's house, Stratford-upon-Avon, the Globe. Then it was off to Italy, where I spent 2 weeks enjoying the art, architecture, and food. Then there was Greece with its ancient ruins and crystal-clear sea. I sent postcards to my new friends at the Seabreeze Cafe, but not to Pearl. To her, I sent a quick message saying I was going away for a while and would contact her when I returned. As I traveled, I felt my world expand, old resentments go away, and I finally began to live life to the fullest. I met interesting people, tried new foods, saw places I had only read about in books before. When I got back to South Portland, there were many messages waiting for me from Pearl. First politely wondering when I'd be back, then increasingly insistent, and finally downright annoyed at my silence. The last message was sent yesterday. "Dad, I don't understand why you're ignoring us. We are your family. We are worried about you." Please call us as soon as you get this message. I knew I should respond, but not now. I needed to sort out my feelings first, to decide what I wanted our relationship to be like in the future. Instead, I wrote a letter to the college principal, offering another donation this time to establish the Winifred Abbott Memorial Scholarship Fund for low-income students studying literature. We would like to formally announce the fund at the groundbreaking ceremony for the new building, the principal replied, and it would be greatly appreciated if you would agree to give a speech on that day. I agreed, not realizing that this decision would lead to the final disclosure of my secret to Pearl and the entire town. The ceremony was set for the following week. I prepared a short speech about the importance of education and how literature could change lives, about Winifred, who always believed in the power of knowledge, about students who, like I once did, come from families where higher education is a privilege, not a given. On the day of the ceremony, the weather was clear and warm. The college grounds were decorated with flags and flowers. Many people gathered: teachers, students, local residents, representatives of the city administration, and among them, to my surprise, I spotted Pearl. She was standing in the back rows, elegant in an austere suit, with an expression of tense anticipation on her face. Our gazes met for a moment, and I saw a mixture of emotions in her eyes: curiosity, uncertainty, perhaps even remorse. When the college principal introduced me as the generous benefactor whose anonymous donation made this project possible, a surprised whisper ran through the crowd. I stepped up onto the small stage, feeling the stares of hundreds of eyes on me. I hadn't planned to reveal my identity, I began, but I realized that sometimes it's important to not only do good, but to inspire others by my example. I talked about my love for the college, my years of teaching, the students who have become like family to me, about Winifred, who has always supported me, and about the future generations who will be able to get an education thanks to the scholarship fund. When I finished my speech, there was a round of applause. People rose from their seats in appreciation. And I looked at Pearl, who stood motionless, a look of utter shock on her face. After the ceremony, many people came up to me: former colleagues, students, local media. Everyone wanted to talk to the man who had donated millions to the college. I answered questions politely but discreetly, not going into details about my financial situation. Finally, through the crowd, Pearl made her way toward me. She looked as if she had seen a ghost. "Daddy," she said in a trembling voice, "we have to talk." "Daddy, we need to talk," Pearl repeated as we moved away from the crowd into a quiet corner of the university park. Her face was a mixture of shock, disbelief, and something else I couldn't quite pinpoint. Maybe it was regret, or maybe it was just annoyance at being caught off guard. "Of course, Pearl. What do you want to talk about?" I asked calmly, though I could feel the tension inside. You've donated millions to this college?" She said it as if she couldn't believe what she was saying. "And set up a scholarship fund in Mom's name?" "Yes," I answered simply. "But how? Where did you get that kind of money? You talked about some investment, but I thought it was a few thousand, maybe $100,000. Oh, I invested your great-uncle Frederick's inheritance in a tech startup 20 years ago. The company was recently sold for billions. My shares are now worth a significant amount of money." She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. In a way, she did. She'd never seen me as someone capable of such financial success. "And you kept quiet about it all this time? Even when you were living with us? Even when we—" She stammered, hesitant to say the reminder of our fight out loud. "Even when you kicked me out of your house, calling me a disgrace and a beggar?" I finished for her. "Yes, Pearl, I was silent. At first, because I did not realize the extent of my condition. And then I wondered if your attitude toward me would change if you knew that I was no longer a beggar." Pearl turned pale and lowered her eyes. "Dad, that's not what I meant at the time. I was upset, under pressure. Roland and I were in serious financial trouble. I'd been up nights wondering how to pay the bills, how to keep the house, how to give the children the future we'd promised them. And you decided to take your frustration out on me? It was horrible of me, I know." She looked up, and I saw tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry for what I said. I'm so sorry I let you go." I looked at my daughter, the beautiful, successful woman Winifred and I had raised with so much love. I wanted to believe in the sincerity of her remorse. I wanted to forgive and forget all the wrongs, but something inside me resisted. I think we should talk somewhere else, I said, noticing a group of people with cameras heading toward us. Dash my place, perhaps? Pearl nodded, wiping her eyes quickly. Yes, of course. Can I come over tonight? Come by 6, I answered, writing my address on the back of my business card. Just you without Roland and the kids, okay? Okay, she agreed, clearly disappointed that she couldn't bring her family. We parted, and I returned home feeling a strange mixture of emotions. On the one hand, I was glad to see my daughter again, to see a glimmer of what might have been real remorse in her eyes. On the other hand, I couldn't shake the suspicion that her sudden desire to repair the relationship was not due to love for me, but to the realization of my new financial situation. By 6 o'clock, I had prepared a light dinner and opened a bottle of good wine. My apartment, though not luxurious, was elegant and cozy. The large windows overlooked the ocean, the furniture was of high quality and comfortable, and the walls were decorated with paintings by local artists. It was the home of a man of taste and means, but without ostentatious luxury. Pearl arrived exactly at 6, dressed in an expensive but understated suit. She brought a bouquet of my favorite lilies, the flowers I always gave Winifred on their wedding anniversary. "Ah, you remember," I remarked, accepting the bouquet. "Of course I do, Daddy." She smiled a little uncertainly. "I remember how you brought Mom lilies every year, even when we were barely making ends meet." I led her into the living room, where the table was already set. She looked around with undisguised curiosity, noting the details of the interior, the quality of the furniture, the view from the window. "You have a beautiful apartment," she said at last. "Very stylish. Thank you. I'm comfortable here." We sat down at the table, and I poured wine into glasses. There was an awkward pause. Too many unspoken words stood between us. "Papa," Pearl began, twirling her glass in her hands, "I must apologize for what happened, for all the terrible things I said. I was out of my mind with stress." "That's no excuse, Pearl," I objected softly. "Stress can make us irritable, but it doesn't change our fundamental beliefs and values." "You're right," she nodded, "but you have to understand the position I was in. Roland could have lost his job. We had huge debts. The children's school was costing a fortune. I felt like everything was falling apart. And when you became the center of attention at that dinner, I just snapped." I paused, sipping my wine and considering her words. "I realize you were under pressure, Pearl, but what really hurt me was the realization that you were ashamed of me. Not just of my financial situation, but of my whole life, my career, my values, my choices." She lowered her eyes. "That's not true, Dad. I've never been ashamed of you as a person. I just, I wanted more for my family. I didn't want my children to grow up with the same limitations that I did." "Limitations?" I felt the pain rising up inside me again. "You think your childhood was limited?" "No, that's not what I meant," she corrected quickly. "You and Mom gave me everything you could. But face it, Dad, we were never a wealthy family. We didn't go on expensive vacations, we didn't wear brand name clothes, we didn't live in an upscale neighborhood. And that made you unhappy?" She hesitated, obviously searching for words. "Not miserable, but I always knew I wanted a different life for myself and my children. More comfortable." I nodded, beginning to understand. Pearl had always sought a certain way of life, a status she thought would bring happiness, and she'd been willing to reject anything that didn't fit that image, including her beggar father. "And now that you've learned that I'm not so poor, has your attitude changed?" Sinuin. "No, Daddy, you misunderstand," she protested. "It's not about the money. It's about me realizing my mistake. I miss you. The kids miss you." "Do they?" I asked doubtfully. "The same kids who called me old man and cringed when I offered to help them with their homework?" Pearl blushed. "They're just teenagers, Dad. They don't understand. But they love you really." I decided not to press the subject. Instead, I served dinner, simple but elegant. Baked salmon, fresh vegetables, homemade bread. "This looks delicious," Pearl said, clearly surprised. "Did you cook it yourself?" "Yes, I took some cooking lessons. Turns out it's very relaxing." "Cooking lessons?" she repeated with a slight chuckle. You're full of surprises, Dad. We ate in relative silence, occasionally exchanging neutral remarks about the weather, the city news, her work. We avoided talking about money, about the past, about our fight. After dinner, we moved into the living room with cups of coffee. Pearl sat on the couch with her legs tucked under her, a gesture that reminded me of her as a child, when she used to do the same when she listened to my bedtime stories. Daddy, she began again, I want us to start over. Forget the wrongs of the past. Become a family, a real family. What do you suggest? I asked, even though I knew where she was going with this. Move in with us, she blurted out. Not in the guest room, but in a separate apartment above the garage. We can remodel it for you, give you a separate entrance. Anything you want. You'll be close to your grandchildren. You can watch them grow up. I gave her a long look. And this has nothing to do with my financial situation. Of course not, she exclaimed too quickly. How can you think that? It's just a strange coincidence, I remarked. You kick me out when you thought I was poor, and you invite me back when you know I'm rich. It's not fair, Dad. Her voice trembled. I tried to contact you long before I knew you had money. I called, I wrote, I invited you to dinner. Yeah, after I read in the paper about my possible involvement in the college donation. She blushed, and I realized I'd hit the mark. Okay, she finally admitted. Yes, I was intrigued by the article. But not because of the money. I just thought that if you're doing this kind of thing, you're doing well. You've found your place, your path. I didn't answer, and she continued more and more fervently. Dad, we're a family. Despite all our differences, all our grudges, we're bonded by blood. You're the only parent I have left. You're the only grandfather of my children. Isn't that more important than anything else? Family isn't just about blood, Pearl, I said softly. It's mutual respect, acceptance, support. It's the ability to love someone for who they are, not who you want them to be. I love you as you are, Dash, she exclaimed. You do? What was I like 6 months ago when I lived in your house? Did you love me then, with my old sweaters, with my stories about college, with my poverty? She didn't answer, and I saw understanding in her eyes. She couldn't lie to me, couldn't lie to herself. Shakan, I'll do anything to make up for my mistakes, she said quietly. Give me a chance to prove that I've changed. I sighed. Part of me wanted to believe her, to give her that chance. But the other part remembered all too well the pain of the last few months, remembered the look of contempt on her face when she called me a disgrace. I'm not moving in with you, Pearl, I said firmly. I like my apartment, my independence, my new life. But we could see each other more often, she insisted. Sunday dinners, family gatherings. The kids could come to you after school. You could help them with their literature, like you always wanted to. Maybe, I nodded, but first we need to rebuild trust, and that takes time. She looked at me hopefully. Then you're not giving up on us completely? No, Pearl. You're my daughter, and I will always love you. But I won't let you or anyone else treat me disrespectfully, and I won't let money define our relationship. She nodded, and for a moment I saw a glimmer of understanding in her eyes. But then she asked, what about financial aid? You know we're going through some tough times, not because of wastefulness, as you think, but because of the recession, because of layoffs at Roland's firm. We could lose the house. And there it was. The real reason for her visit, her apology, her offers to repair the relationship. I'll help you, I said after a pause. But not unconditionally. I have demands. What are they? Her eyes lit up with hope and something else. Calculating? First, you must live within your means. No new loans, no unnecessary spending. Second, the children must understand the value of money. No endless gifts, no sense of privilege. And third, Roland must agree to financial counseling. I'll introduce him to Arthur Prescott, my financial advisor. Pearl frowned. It sounds as if you don't trust us to manage your finances. I don't trust us, I answered honestly, because you've already proven that you don't know how to do it. You're in debt, living beyond your means, trying to impress people who don't really care. She opened her mouth to object, but then closed it and just nodded. Good. We agree to your terms. One more thing, I added. This money will be a loan, not a gift. A low-interest loan, but still a loan that has to be paid back. A loan? Her surprise was genuine. But Dad, you have millions. Yes, I have money, and I'm deciding how to use it. Most of it will go to charity, foundations, and scholarships. The rest will provide for my old age and maybe help my grandchildren get an education. But I'm not going to just give the money away, not even to my family. I saw the look on her face change from shock to disappointment, from frustration to calculation. Of course, Daddy, she finally said with a strained smile. I understand. It's your money, and you have the right to use it however you want. But I could see that she didn't understand. To her, my refusal to just give her the money was a betrayal, a violation of some unspoken family contract. In her world, parents were supposed to give everything to their children, to sacrifice themselves for their comfort and status. How much do you need? I asked bluntly. She said an amount that would have made me pale 6 months ago, but now I just nodded. I'll wire the money tomorrow. Arthur will prepare all the paperwork for the loan. Thank you, Dad, she said with relief. You don't know how important this is to us. We finished our coffee, discussing the details of the loan, the plans for the future, the possibility of a family dinner next Sunday. Everything was polite, civilized, almost normal, but I could sense the falseness in her smile, the calculation in her offers, the self-interest behind her sudden concern. When she got ready to leave, I walked her to the door. She hugged me, and for a moment I smelled the familiar scent of her perfume, the same perfume Winifred wore. I'm so glad we're together again, Daddy, she said, pulling away. Family is the most important thing. I nodded, not trusting my voice. When the door closed behind her, I stood in the hallway for a long time, trying to sort through my feelings. Sadness at the realization that our relationship would never be the same. Anger at her blatant self-interest. And a strange relief that I could finally see the truth and act accordingly. The next morning I called Arthur and asked him to prepare the paperwork for Pearl and Roland's loan. I then contacted the college principal and made an appointment to discuss another donation, this time to establish a center for literature and the arts. Pearl called in the evening to thank me for transferring the money and to invite me to Sunday dinner. I agreed, even though I knew it would be a challenging visit. Indeed, Sunday lunch at Pearl's house turned out to be a strange experience. Roland was exaggeratedly polite. The children who had barely noticed me before now took an unnatural interest in my life. Pearl fussed about, trying to please my every wish. Papa, perhaps you would like to spend the night? She asked when I was about to leave. Your old room is always ready. Thanks, but no thanks, I replied. I have a meeting with the college principal in the morning. Oh, about the new endowment, she asked me casually. Yes, I'm planning to create a center for literature and the arts. How generous of you, she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You do so much for the college. And for the family? I just gave you a loan that will save your house, I reminded her. Yes, of course, and we're very grateful. But I had something more, long-term. An inheritance for the children, for example. Here it is. The real reason for her sudden care and attention. I've made a will, I said calmly. Some of the money will go to Ezra and Olivia's education. The rest for charity. Just for education? Her voice shook. What about the rest? I've decided to use the rest to help those who really need it, I answered firmly. Students without means. Talented kids from poor families. People who want to change their lives through education, but don't have the opportunity. I saw her face change from hope to disappointment, from frustration to barely concealed anger. Would you rather give your money to strangers than to your own family? Her voice was quiet, but I could hear the same steely note in it that I'd heard the night we'd fought. I prefer to use my money as I see fit, I answered calmly. And I hope my family will respect my decision, even if they don't agree with it. We stood at the front door, looking at each other. There was a gulf between us again, but now I saw it clearly, and I had no illusions that it could be bridged. Goodbye, Pearl, I said, opening the door. I'll see you next week. She nodded, her face a frozen mask of politeness. Sure, Dad, I'll see you then. I knew she would call me in a few days, invite me to lunch again, show concern, inquire about my plans. But now I understood what drove her, and this understanding, though painful, freed me from illusions and false hopes. As I stepped outside, I took a deep breath of the fresh evening air. The sky was clear, studded with stars. I thought of Winifred, of what she had said to me before she died. Take care of her, Hugh. She's strong, but sometimes that strength turns to stiffness. I've tried to take care of Pearl all my life, giving her everything I could. But perhaps the real care wasn't in giving, but in letting her face the consequences of her decisions and actions. With that thought in mind, I headed to my car feeling strangely calm. I had done everything I could for my daughter. Now it was time to do something for myself and for those who really needed help. After Sunday lunch at Pearl's, a few weeks passed. I had fulfilled my promise of a loan, the papers were signed, and the money was transferred. Roland met with Arthur Prescott for financial counseling, and according to my counselor, was surprisingly receptive to the advice offered. Perhaps the threat of losing his home had made him reconsider his habits. I attended their Sunday lunches, socialized with the grandchildren, and maintained a polite relationship with Pearl. On the surface, everything seemed normal, even harmonious, but I could sense the falseness in my daughter's smile, see the calculation in her eyes. She was playing the role of caring daughter, hoping to influence my decision about the inheritance. The emptiness of this relationship depressed me. I searched for a way to fill it, to find a true connection, a true family, not by blood, but by spirit. The solution came unexpectedly. One of my friends from the Seabreeze Cafe, Simon, mentioned that he teaches art at a local center for troubled teens. You should drop in sometime, Hugh, he suggested. They could really use someone with your teaching experience. Maybe a literary club or something. I was skeptical at first. My experience was in college, with mature students, not troubled teens. But curiosity took over, and the following Wednesday I went with Simon to the New Horizons Center. The building of the center was old and shabby, but inside there was an atmosphere of creativity and warmth. There were paintings and drawings created by the children on the walls, quiet music playing, and activities going on in different rooms. We work with children from dysfunctional families, orphans, those who have already had problems with the law, Simon explained as he led me through the corridors. Here they find a safe space, an opportunity for self-expression, support. He led me to the classroom where his art class was taking place. 6 teenagers were sitting at easels, trying to paint a still life of fruit in an old oil lamp. Guys, this is my friend Hugh, Simon introduced me. He was a professor of literature, and he might be teaching a class here. The teenagers looked up, gave me appraising glances, and went back to their drawings. All except one girl. She kept looking at me with obvious curiosity. Were you really a professor, she asked. And what did you teach? English literature, I answered. 43 years at South Portland College. 43? Her eyes widened. That's a lifetime. Yes, practically my entire adult life, I smiled. And you never got bored of teaching the same thing? Never. Every year new students came with new questions, new perspectives. Literature does not stand still. It lives and breathes through those who read it. The girl thought about my words, then nodded as if she had made up her mind. My name is Carlotta, she said. If you'll teach the class, I'll come. After the class, Simon told me more about her. Carlotta was 15. Her mother had died of an overdose 3 years ago, her father unknown. She had lived in foster homes since then, but had never stayed anywhere for long because of her difficult character. She was now in a group home from where she was taken to classes at the center. She's a smart girl, very well read, but with huge gaps in her education, Simon said, and very distrustful. You're the first person she's ever talked to on her first day. I decided to give it a try. The next week I held a trial session of the literature club. 4 teenagers showed up, including Carlotta. I started with short stories that could be read in one session and discussed immediately. To my surprise, the kids engaged in the discussion, especially Carlotta, who offered unexpectedly profound interpretations. After class, she came up to me and asked about the books. When I learned that she had never had a book of her own, something clicked inside me. I remembered Winifred, her love of literature, and I saw in Carlotta's eyes the same fire, the same thirst for knowledge, the same purity of soul. I began to come to the center more often, not only for the literary circle, but also just to talk to Carlotta. Gradually, she opened up, told me about her life, about her dreams of becoming a writer or a literature teacher. After 3 months of such meetings, I realized that I was much more attached to Carlotta than I thought. The idea came suddenly, but once it took shape, I realized it was the right decision. I spoke to the head of the center, explained my situation, and expressed my desire to become a foster parent for Carlotta. "This is an unusual case, Mr. Abbott," she said, looking at me carefully. "Your age, most foster parents are much younger." "I understand," I nodded. "Nar, but I have experience raising a child, a stable financial situation, and most importantly, a sincere desire to give Carlotta a home, support, and educational opportunities. It's going to be a complicated process," she warned me. "Checks, interviews, bureaucracy. And there's no guarantee the court will approve. I'm willing to go through all that." Talking to Carlotta was the hardest part. I invited her to the cafe after class and spent a lot of time choosing my words. "Carlotta," I finally began, "I've grown very fond of you over the months. You're a smart, talented girl with a big heart, and I've been thinking, I'd like to offer you a place to live with me, to be your foster father if you agree." She froze, her eyes widening in surprise. "You, you want to adopt me?" She whispered. "Yes," I answered simply. "I want to give you a home, support, a chance to learn and grow, but only if that's what you want." She lowered her eyes and I saw tears rolling down her cheeks. "No one ever, no one ever wanted me," she said in a shaky voice. "I'm too old to be adopted. Everyone wants little kids." "I'm not everyone," I smiled. "And for me, you're the perfect age. What if I'm not right for you? What if you regret it?" "That won't happen," I said confidently. "I already know who you are, and I want you to be a part of my life, my family. I want to, I want to try," she said quietly, "if you're really sure." The adoption process was complicated and long. Social services checks, psychological evaluations, interviews, mountains of paperwork. My age was a major obstacle. The social workers doubted I could provide long-term stability for a teenager. But my financial situation, education, teaching experience, and clean reputation played in my favor. I set up a trust fund for Carlotta, securing her future regardless of my longevity. The deciding factor was Carlotta's own fervent desire. While the process was underway, Carlotta began to visit my home regularly on weekends as part of a program of getting to know each other and adjusting. We cooked together, watched movies, discussed books. I helped her with her studies, especially literature and history. One of those weekends, Pearl came to visit us. She arrived unannounced, ostensibly to invite me to Olivia's birthday party. Her face stretched in surprise when Carlotta opened the door. "Hello," she said politely. "Are you here to see Mr. Abbott? He's in the kitchen making dinner." Pearl walked into the house, giving Carlotta an appraising glance. "Who are you?" she asked without ceremony. "Carlotta Reyes," she answered, straightening up. "Yeah, I'll be living here soon. Mr. Abbott is adopting me." Pearl froze, her face contorted with shock and something else. Anger, fear, disappointment. "Daddy," she called loudly. "Are you home?" I came out of the kitchen, wiping my hands with a towel. "Pearl, I wasn't expecting you today." "Obviously," she said, nodding toward Carlotta. "We need to talk. Alone." When Carlotta left for the kitchen, Pearl turned to me, her eyes blazing with anger. "Adoption? Really, Dad? At your age?" "Yes, Pearl. I'm adopting Carlotta. The trial's already underway. All that's left is the final hearing." "Are you crazy? You're 68 years old. What's going to happen to her when you're gone?" "I've secured her future," I replied calmly. "A trust fund for her education, housing funds. Even if something happens to me, she'll be safe." "It's not just the money," Pearl exclaimed. "Have you thought about what it looks like? An old man adopting a teenage girl?" I felt anger rising in me. "Be careful, Pearl," I warned quietly. "You're in dangerous territory." "I'm just saying what people will think," she continued stubbornly. "And who is she anyway? Some street kid? You don't know anything about her." "I know enough about her," I said firmly. "She's smart, talented, good-hearted, and she needs a family, stability, support." "What about your real family?" Pearl sounded hurt. "You already have a daughter, grandchildren. Why do you need a stranger?" My real family, as you put it, is only interested in me for my money," I said bluntly. "You proved it yourself." Pearl turned pale. "That's not fair. I'm trying to make a relationship work, and you..." I see the truth, Pearl. You never called, never came to visit until you knew about my condition. And even now, every conversation is about the inheritance. Because we're your family, Dash, she exclaimed. And this girl, what is she to you? A person who appreciates me for who I am, not what I have, I answered simply. A person with whom I feel a real connection, a real intimacy, like I once felt with you and your mom. She's manipulating you, don't you see? She wants your money, your house, your inheritance. She's using you. That's enough, Pearl, I cut her off. You don't know Carlotta. Don't judge her by your own standards. I will contest this adoption, she said firmly. I have rights as your daughter. I will prove that you are incompetent, that you are being manipulated. I looked at her for a long moment, feeling the last threads that bound us together break one by one. If you do this, Pearl, I said quietly but firmly, you'll lose me forever. Not only my inheritance, but myself. I'll cut you out of my life. She flinched as if I'd hit her. You're choosing this foreign girl over your own daughter? I'm choosing a man who loves me sincerely, without conditions or expectations. A man who needs me as a father, not as an ATM machine. I won't let some random girl steal what is rightfully mine and my children's, she said quietly but firmly. You'll regret it, Daddy. With those words, she turned and walked out, slamming the door. I stood in the hallway feeling strangely relieved. It was as if the heavy weight I'd been carrying for years had suddenly disappeared. Pearl had made her choice, and I had made mine. Pearl did try to contest the adoption. She hired an expensive lawyer who presented arguments to the court about my age, about possible manipulation by Carlotta, about violating the rights of the real family. But the judge, after hearing all sides, including Carlotta herself, overruled Pearl's objections. The court finds that the adoption is in the best interests of the child, he said. Mr. Abbott has demonstrated the ability to provide a stable, loving environment and financial security for Carlotta Reyes. The day the adoption was made official, Carlotta and I threw a small party. We invited my friends from the Seabreeze Cafe, her friends from the center, supervisors and teachers. You are now officially Carlotta Abbott, I said, raising my glass of non-alcoholic champagne. Welcome to the family. To our family, she added, glowing. In the weeks that followed, I completely revised my will. Most of the fortune still went to charity, educational funds, scholarships, support for the arts. Carlotta received enough for a comfortable life and a quality education, but not so much that she lost motivation for her own achievements. To Pearl and her children, I left a token amount, enough to show that I hadn't completely forgotten about them, but not enough for them to consider it a real legacy. Arthur Prescott, looking over the documents, raised his eyebrows. Are you sure of this decision, Hugh? He asked. It could cause a serious conflict. I'm sure, I nodded. There is already a conflict. This is simply its logical conclusion. Pearl found out about my decision from her lawyer, who somehow got the information. She became furious, threatened legal action, a public scandal. But eventually she backed down, realizing she had no real leverage. I was sane, capable, and had every right to dispose of my property as I saw fit. We went our separate ways. She stopped calling, stopped inviting me to family dinners. The grandchildren, following their mother's example, also cut off contact. Sometimes I felt a pang of regret, remembering how I'd held newborn Pearl in my arms, how I'd taught her to ride a bicycle, how proud I'd been of her first successes. But those memories belong to the past, to another life, to other people. My new life was with Carlotta. We set up her room together, choosing colors, furniture, decorations. I enrolled her in a good school, hired tutors to fill in the gaps in her education. She blossomed from a wary, insecure teenager into a bright, talented young girl. Every evening we read together, discussed books, movies, art. I shared my knowledge with her. She shared her fresh perspective, her perception of the world. We traveled, visited museums, theaters, concerts. I showed her a world she had never seen, and she showed me that same world with new eyes. Sometimes in the evenings as we sat on the balcony looking out at the ocean, I felt Winifred's presence close by. It seemed to me that she approved of my choices, my path. She had always said that true family was not just blood, but a heart-to-heart connection, mutual respect, sincere love. I found that with Carlotta, and though the path was not easy, the result was worth every minute of the struggle.